The highest tuition for a year in Prince Edward Island would be $17,000. However, in Ontario, the average is $45,000. If you are considering to travel to Canada as an international student, this pricing alone makes a big difference in whether you have the ability to pay your tuition cash in Canada or not. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. On this channel I talk about life in Canada, Canadian immigration and personal development. Now today I will be comparing the cost of living in Prince Edward Island, Canada, which is where I am located, versus Toronto, Canada. Now the first thing that I need to talk about in terms of provinces and the difference between Prince Edward Island versus Toronto is that Prince Edward Island is the smallest province in Canada, and then Toronto, Canada would be the largest city in Canada. Now I am going to narrow down my cost of living between Prince Edward Island and Toronto. Now, when you're choosing a province, I believe one of the first things you should consider is the cost of living in that province. The only time that I think that you shouldn't and don't need to care about the cost of living in the province that you're choosing is if you're already rich and you already have a lot of money, so it doesn't matter where you live, anywhere you're located, you'll have the money, then you're good to go. Now, if you're someone that considers the cost of living in Canada before making a decision, then that's what I'll be talking about today. Now, Canada has 10 different provinces, and then they have 3 different territories. One of the main things about the territories of Canada is that they are very cold, so I don't expect that you are going to want to go there. But that is also an option where you can go to places like Nunavut, Yukon, and places like that. That is just very, very cold. So that's what the territories are like. In terms of the rest of Canada, the cold and the temperature does differ from province to province significantly. Toronto and all of Ontario, I would say, is one of the warmest provinces that you can find in Canada. British Columbia is also one of the warmest provinces in Canada as well. So that is why most people tend to go to these areas, because they are one of the warmest places in Canada. If you're thinking about some of the colder provinces of Canada, some of them would include places like Alberta. Winnipeg would be some of the coldest places inside of Canada. So if you're thinking about somewhere that is cold versus warm, then that is something you can consider. And then all the other provinces is somewhere in the middle of those provinces I've already mentioned. Now, my number one reason for choosing Prince Edward Island was actually because of the low cost of living and also the low tuition. When you are to compare places like Toronto versus Prince Edward Island, what you would see is that there's a significant difference in the price, especially for the main thing that I was coming for, which is for school. The tuition was the main thing there, and it was extremely expensive in somewhere like Toronto. It's also expensive in BC and places like that. So the main motivation to come to Prince Edward Island was actually the low cost of living, and it's not only the tuition, which is something I mentioned in another video, but the next major thing that is less expensive than the other provinces is the rent. So let's just break down what exactly are the costs to live in different provinces of Canada. So what we'll be doing today is to compare Toronto's rent, their tuition, compare cost of living, includes even utilities, all those things I'll be comparing all of these things for both Toronto and Prince Edward Island. Something to note is that there are actually only 2 schools in Prince Edward Island. It's one college and one university that accepts international students. The college is called Holland College, and the university is called University of Prince Edward Island. Those are the only 2 schools that are located in Prince Edward Island in terms of schools that you can consider attending. Now, in terms of these schools, these are schools that offers academic programs. They offer the basic things, all the regular and basic courses that are available everywhere. Prince Edward Island offers those courses, but there are limitations to the courses that are offered here compared to other provinces. So that is something also to note. But if you don't really care about that and you just want the basics, then Prince Edward Island has the basics. So first up, the minimum wage in Toronto in Ontario, Canada is $16.55, and the minimum wage in Prince Edward Island is $15.40. Now I tend to compare the minimum wages because that's like the most concrete wage that you can consider. Of course, things begin to vary a lot and significantly when you're starting to think about different jobs, higher education, and things like that. But what I'm going to do today is to more so focus on the people who are just coming to Canada and they just need their footing, or just persons who are temporary residents getting to permanent resident. Somewhere there, you are the persons who there's a high possibility that you would be in a minimum wage job, and the persons who are making decent salaries are persons who have been in Canada for a while. Of course, this is not for everyone. Yes, there are people who come to Canada and land really good jobs, but that is not something that is very frequent, and that is why I'm focusing on what is more frequent, which is that a lot of people just work minimum wage jobs. Now, with that being said, the minimum wage in Toronto, Ontario is $16.55, while the minimum wage in Prince Edward Island is $15.40. This alone shows you that living in somewhere like Toronto does make your life extremely difficult, because Toronto is extremely expensive, which I'm about to get into. Now, the first thing I'm going to compare is the tuition in Ontario, Toronto specifically, but other areas like Hamilton, Ontario, London, Ontario, Brampton, Ontario, all those places kind of have a similar cost range. The average tuition in Ontario, Toronto, you are looking at about $45,000. And that's average, which means it goes more than that and it's also less than that. But on average, the tuition in Toronto / Ontario is $45,000. So in Toronto, I'm talking about the average tuition, but I'm going to talk about the highest tuition in PEI, which is very easy to narrow down because it's only one university here. Now, the highest or the more possible tuition for a year in Prince Edward Island would be $17,000, $16,000 to $17,000. That's the highest tuition you can pay. However, in Ontario, the average is $45,000, and I've seen tuition, I don't remember for what course, but I've seen a course that was $65,000. That alone shows you the comparison, and if you are considering to travel to Canada as an international student, this pricing alone makes a big difference in whether you have the ability to pay your tuition cash in Canada or not, which will also be my next video, or the video after my next video, where I break down whether the cost of tuition can be covered by you just working in Canada. Now, I'm going to be talking about the possibility in Prince Edward Island, mostly because even in Toronto, I cannot tell you that there is a possibility of you being able to pay your tuition if you are going to a university. Because if your tuition is $45,000, that is a high paying job that you would need to have the ability to pay the $45,000. Plus, you still need to find the living expenses. So it's pretty much impossible for you to cover it. And most persons in Toronto, in that regard, if you don't have the money and want to work for it, would need to go to a college, because you would not be able to afford a university degree. Okay, so now I'm going to compare a one-bedroom apartment. This is going to be, on average, most people will want a one-bedroom apartment. The average one-bedroom apartment in Toronto is $2,400. The average one-bedroom apartment in Prince Edward Island is $1,200. $200. So even less than half the price of the amount in Toronto. So tuition is extremely expensive in Toronto. Rent is extremely expensive in Toronto. Let's move on. So what you'll see is that after these two expenses, tuition and rent, the other expenses averages the same amount each month in all the provinces in Canada, in my opinion. Why I'm saying that is because I have watched multiple videos of people located in other provinces talking about the cost of living and how much they spend on grocery, how much they spend on car insurance, how much they spend on their phone bill, and it's always the same amount throughout all of Canada. Every province I've looked into, all of them averages the same. The only province that doesn't average the same is British Columbia. British Columbia's regular monthly expenses is higher in terms of just grocery, phone bill, all those things is higher in British Columbia. However, even in Toronto, it's the same amount as Prince Edward Island. Now, if you look at individual goods, what you'll see in terms of individual goods is that there is a difference. So you're going to see, if you look at a lettuce, you'll see lettuce is cheaper in Toronto. That's something that I noticed. If you look at an individual item, it would be cheaper. However, if you continue looking around, you'll get to see that there are some that are more expensive. So that is why I say on average, it does average the same amount throughout Canada. So what I've done is to make an average of the cost that I've been spending since the beginning of the year to last month. So that's what I've done to put together the cost, and you're going to see these similar costs throughout all of Canada except for British Columbia. So first thing is food/grocery, and that was a total of $230 each month on average. Eating out was a total of, I actually wrote the highest amount. If I place average, it would be about $50, but the highest amount was $106. And one of the main things that persons always wonder about is my food bill, because it's always very low. The reason why my food bill is very low is because I'm very intentional with the food that I eat, and I actually spend a lot on vegetables and fruits, which should equate to me having a very high food bill, but it doesn't, because I'm very intentional. And I'll do like grocery videos in the future, and I've done some before, so I can just link them here or here for you so you can see like my regular grocery expenses. Phone bill. My phone bill includes the cost for my phone and the phone bill. The phone bill is about $70, and then the cost for the phone is like $5 per month for 2 years, and it was a sale that I got my phone on, which again is how I'm able to save, because I make purchases in the time when there are sales, which for a phone you buy it in December because that's when you have sale, because pretty much they are selling out the phones for the last year to get new stock on the phones for the next year. So December is like the best time to purchase a phone if you want a decent discount. I also have a storage unit. This is a large storage unit. I'm going to say if it was for one person, the storage unit would be for $80. But for 2 people, it comes to $108. That is because getting a way bigger space is actually a bit cheaper than to pay for a smaller space. But let's just say for a storage unit for you and just one person, it is $80. If you have like a lot of furniture, which I doubt you have to be putting in storage, I doubt you're going to have that expense. But if you just so happen to have that, then this $108 would apply to you, because it is a large storage unit. Car insurance. So car insurance is $90 per month. Gas is $85, but that's for short commutes. I only do short commutes. I don't do any long commutes because I live in the middle of the city, so my commutes are very short because where I need to go is literally no more than 15 minutes away maximum. To drive through all of Charlottetown in one direction, you can finish the drive in 35 minutes. You can finish the entire drive. So it's very small. So commutes are small, so that's important to consider. So if you're doing a 1 hour commute, gas is going to be way more for you versus me that only commute for like 5 minutes and I'm there. For the most part, I only go to places very close, and then one off I'll go to the further places. But in terms of where I go like every single day, it's a very short commute of 5 minutes and I'm there. So Netflix is a cost of $6.89. Netflix is very inexpensive, especially now that they are running ads. The lowest one is now $6.89 and 2 persons can use it. Shopping, like to buy clothes, shoes, that's about $200. Entertainment is very inexpensive for me. It's $40. A lot of months is $0. So it really just depends on you. But that's very inexpensive for me. A movie is like $20, and if you do the scene point, then it's free of cost to go to a movie. And then you have miscellaneous costs, and you can say that's about $200. For me, the maximum was $300, so I'm saying on average it would be $200 for miscellaneous. And with all that included, then you have a total of $2,350.89. What we can do with this amount is to pretty much calculate minimum wage and whether minimum wage can cover your living expenses. That would be something nice to take a look at. So let's just look at that briefly. And my next video is going to be me talking about whether or not you can cover your tuition with just these salary amounts. But let's just say your total expense is $2,250. The thing with this total is that this would apply to persons who are working. If you are going to school and you want to pay your own tuition, there are a lot of expenses here that I would tell you to eliminate. You cannot be eating out. You cannot be having miscellaneous expenses at this point. You cannot have a lot of these things. You cannot have a storage unit. You can't be shopping. Like, you just have to wear the clothes on your back and that's it. Like, for international students who want to pay your tuition, it's a different budget altogether for you because you should not have all these expenses. But for anybody other than an international student, these amounts would apply to you. So the minimum wage is $15.40 in PEI. So that would be $15.40 multiplied by 37.5 hours multiplied by 4 weeks. That would give you $2,310 for PEI, and Toronto, that would be $16.55 multiplied by 37.5 times 4, $2,482.50. And the total expense in PEI would be $2,250.89. So PEI's minimum wage would be able to cover all expenses, and then basically you wouldn't have any savings except about $60 per month for saving. And then Toronto's expenses at $1,300 plus the $2,089 plus $1,300. Toronto's living expenses alone would be $3,550. So how people survive in Toronto is to share their apartment That's how you cut your living expenses in half, but that half is what someone in PEI can get for their full apartment without sharing with anybody. So that's the totals for living expenses and just comparing Prince Edward Island's expenses versus Toronto, and just showing you why it makes sense to move to a province that has a lower cost of living, because pretty much you can save a lot more money. And a lot of these expenses, for example, if you're making minimum wage, like cut out a lot of these expenses. You shouldn't have any storage unit if you're only making minimum wage. You shouldn't be eating out. You have to cut out as many things as you possibly can if you want to be able to save. If you don't care about saving, then you can always live paycheck to paycheck with your minimum wage income. But if you want to survive on a minimum wage income and save some money, you have to cut down on these things, eliminate a lot of these amounts of money, and a lot of these are mandatory expenses that you can't eliminate anyways. And that is why it's very helpful to have a low rent altogether. If you're an international student watching this video and you're wondering how you will be able to cover your tuition, I have listed 50 different ways that you can pay your tuition in Canada, and that ebook is something that I have written and provided. It will be down in the description box below. If you're interested in that, definitely take a look at it, and it will be very beneficial if you're looking for ways to cover your tuition. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful in some way, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.